All right, welcome to another episode of the Profit Minded Business. And we welcome today Sean Franklin, who is a technology extraordinaire. He's got a long history with computer science, and we're so thankful to have him come on. He's going to have a lot of rich insights for us today. And of course, we have Jacob Andrews of Drones iVue and iVue Media. He is here he has a lot of actual connections with Sean and just some tremendous insights as well. So thank you both for joining us today. My name is Corbin Cook, and I run SMB Strategy Consultants. And we're here today because we feel like we want to learn from each other. Small business owners go through a lot day in and day out. We take a lot of risks, and we rarely have time to spend just understanding other business owners and having the ability to learn from their experiences. So this is what this is all about. It's about us learning from each other, growth, and also from the pitfalls and success. So Sean, tell us a little bit about your history in technology and just get us going.
Okay. I guess I've been around for a while. Jacob will attest to that. But I started out in the early days of the internet. And while I was in college, I basically just stopped everything because I saw an opportunity to start a company in this whole new field called the internet. And
What year was this?
92, 91.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was an interesting time that people were still trying to figure out what it was, and you heard little pieces of it. So in the past, I've mentioned to people that we had to use all kinds of different analogies to explain it, water pipes, or this goes to here. It was very interesting, framing houses, lots of different ways to try to explain what this thing was with the internet.
No one had any idea what it was. It was just this invisible network or pipes.
Right, pipes, and they had a modem. We had people they would take a box and stick it next to the modem and thought that was going to work. And so it was interesting the different skill sets or experience people had at that time, because you had some PCs and they were really starting to pick up, and then this whole idea that I can start communicating and sharing, and you had CompuServe and AOL and all these different companies out there, Prodigy, that you dialed into and then you interacted with, but it wasn't really the internet at that level per se.
Were the founders of like AOL and CompuServe, what did you think of them at the time? Were they just super pioneers, or were they? I mean, what were your thought process around when they?
It was interesting because I probably had kind of an odd view of it. I thought some of their technology was interesting because I grew up with the bulletin boards and you dialed in with the modems and stuff. But the internet seemed to be just more expansive. There was a lot more opportunity. There was different things you could do. You could quickly jump on servers from different countries and see a couple things that they were doing, because there wasn't a lot of content at that time starting out. But over time, I think there was kind of a perception of they're not part of the internet and they're not what I'm thinking. And over time, past that company, later on I did join AOL, which was an interesting experience for me because it was eye-opening. They were actually really bleeding edge. A lot of the stuff that I had perceived was just from the outside and with filter, basically. Yeah. But a lot of the things that we have now today that they were really pushing on the internet side, they transitioned in as internet. And at one point, when I was at AOL, we were running over 50% of the internet through the data center there at AOL. That's worldwide was coming back through the data center in Dulles, Virginia. So it was kind of heady because we had one company from France that wanted to do business with us, and we were talking to them, and it really shocked them when they realized that we had equivalent people at AOL that was close to their population. When they started looking at France and how many people were online, they didn't understand the scales. Oh, and I think and these were moving in towards the 98, 99, 2000, so it was really exploding. When I was there with my company, we just had a lot of we had the area, and what was interesting is I started with two other competitors at exactly the same time. It's just my advertising came out before theirs. So my advertising came out maybe a month before they started doing theirs, and we didn't know that we were all starting companies against each other. So,
wait, back up on that. I felt like I missed where that came from. What do you mean? You said that you had launched your own advertising.
When we launched our internet company, when I was in college, I started looking. You had to go and order all the stuff and the hardware, and you knew your launch date, that everything's going to be turned on, and people can call in. Right. So beforehand, I made sure I understood what avenues for marketing I wanted to attack, due to who was probably the early adopters.
Okay.
So there were some technical magazines that were local, because this was in Brevard County, Virginia, in Florida. So it was Melbourne, Florida. So it was Space Coast and NASA and stuff. There was a lot of areas where there were very technical folks that used it at work. So they would be a natural extension to using it at home.
Yeah, sure.
So there were some magazines that were very specific towards them, and there were other areas. So I had some ads that I went ahead and placed with, hey, we're coming live on this date.
In the magazines.
In these magazines. And
Yeah, right.
we had no idea that there was anyone else. We're like, oh, we're the only ones, because you always think you're the only one.
And all of a sudden, you open up the magazine and...
Well, we were the only ad for that first month.
Okay.
Second month, there were lots of other ads. But it was funny that I think I told Jacob in the past, one of the competitors was actually a team from the college I went to.
Okay.
That was from they ran the IT at the college, and they started one. And there was another person that I knew from working in another company. He started one. None of us had talked to each other.
Sure.
And then the next month, all of us were competitors. So we
Right,
had
y'all
three
all
of us
coming
trying to
from
carve out the same county.
same brain that from the school.
Right.
So wait, now you jumped around a little bit because you
Yeah, I'm sorry
talked
about
about. So you were in Florida and you went to a technical college.
I did.
And you actually graduated with your computer science.
Bachelor of Science, Computer Science.
And that was 98. But in between there, you ran your own company called. What was
It
the
was
name of it?
Tachyon Communications
Tachyon.
Corporation. Yeah, that was my early sci-fi kicking in there, because Tachyon is faster than light.
Oh,
So we were obviously the
that's
fastest.
great. That's great.
And so we launched that.
And what did that company do? Like, you were early in this. Like you said, you were advertising. You were one of the first advertisers in this magazine. But what was the basis of Tachyon?
Okay. So the company itself, we offered internet connections for both consumer as well as business. And we also offered web design as well as integration of different companies and technologies into the internet. So if it was anything related to the internet, or we thought that it could be related to the internet, we took it on. So we had different customers that were large companies that used us for accounts where they would try to break into their own systems. So it was another way for them to do pen testing against their own systems from an outside source.
Interesting.
We had customers that we set up some that were the first ones to have an advertisement really on the internet. One of them, he sold auto parts for trucks, for performance trucks. And so we set them up and everything. And one of the funny stories was, within a couple months, he got an order or a call from Japan wanting to order all these parts because they couldn't get it from this other way. And he was like, how'd you find it? Oh, on the internet. And here he is. He's got a small truck shop.
Yeah.
And Japan wanted this big order. He couldn't fill it, but it was an interesting side effect that wasn't anticipated. And then we had lots of different people coming in and just using it for themselves. They were learning how to use it, or they wanted to have the ability to interact with it at home, because maybe they did it at work and they just didn't have the access at home, or their families did.
So you really were on the ground level, and you even launched your own company during this whole space. And of course, you've got a lot of work history between owning your own business to being a consultant now,
Right.
and how you're actually working with multiple companies when it comes to, specifically right now, it's global positioning. So you have evolved quite a bit over the years. What are some of the pitfalls that you saw startups in technology go through, and what is different today than it was? I mean, I hate to even say then, because technology was so different.
Right. Let's have to think through that, because there's a lot of different examples. But one is back in the past, when everybody was jumping on the internet and trying to do things, that a lot of times there were two things that came out as a theme. One was that they didn't really care about burning money. It's like, oh yeah, it just doesn't matter. Just throw money at it. We want people. Okay. So it didn't matter about profit, loss. It was eyeballs. So as long as you had eyeballs, you're going to be profitable at some point. So I think that drove a lot of the thing, because they kept going, oh, we can do better, we can do better. And so they lost sight of it's a business. And they had to go through and actually generate something with revenue that was continuing and everything else. The other one was that a lot of times that the concepts and the ideas were just a little bit ahead of the skis, if you will. They were really ready for what the infrastructure was able to support, or the people that they were targeting, maybe their perceptions.
Culture.
Great ideas.
Yeah,
The point is, like the Newton came out from a PDA from Apple long before the iPad. Newton was early, iPad just in time. Now, Newton, there's like 3 or 4 of them, I think, in a computer museum somewhere, and a couple people that are fans. But so there were a lot of things that people were trying to do. There was a Pets.com that came out, and they spent all this money on this mascot with this little puppet for a dog, and he was talking, and ads everywhere. Well, they were shipping dog food. Well, the idea of what we have today now, of our expectations with Amazon and everything else, wasn't really in place.
Yeah.
So it was really expensive to ship dog food.
Sure.
So they really weren't able to generate enough revenue to offset costs, in my opinion. So they ended up having to close down after a while, where other companies may have shipped smaller things, and they did fine because it worked with what was currently there. So that was happening a lot. And then like my personal case with my company, they had, because people started seeing that there was money in it, there were a lot of people that would start tons of internet companies. Like, oh, I can set up really easy because prices were going down. So they saturated the market in our county, for example. So they were pushing all the prices down as low as they could. And some of them, they'd bankrupt and they'd come back 2 months later. So they was just because they were rotating. Sort of like you see in some of the old time, some of the surf shops might, you don't see they change the name after a time and stuff. But anyway, there was a lot of competition, and it was, so it was changing the perceptions of the users, which is similar to what happened with AOL, where they went to a flat pricing of $19.95 at that time for all you can eat internet. And all of a sudden they had to stop taking people for a while, and they had that George Jetson's ad at the time, I think it was. And it overwhelmed. They couldn't handle all the traffic, all the people jumping on. So similar things that people's expectations of here's the value of the price and here's everything else, and they were fighting it out. But so I think that's
brand new.
It's brand new.
No one really knew where the prices needed to be.
Right. So I think that part of the other thing that I would say as a cautionary tale is don't always follow the crowd, because if everyone's following each other trying to price to the lowest denomination, for example, then everyone's going to go out of business.
Sure.
So sometimes you have to really hold the ground and say, well, how am I different than the other companies? What is my differentiator?
Yeah.
And I'll stick with it. Where's exceptional customer service, or we do this, and
so
that
sounds like, if you were to look at what it takes, someone's going to launch a new idea on the internet, or a technology, you have certain cautionary tales to look out for. One being, does the culture understand what you're trying to sell?
Right.
The other thing is, what is the cost of delivery? Just because it makes sense that people want dog food delivered to their home, if shipping is going to be $40 and the dog food is 20, then it's not going to work.
Yeah.
So it sounds like, and then not to mention, I think I also heard you say, really making sure that you touched on it just briefly in our conversation, but understanding the relationships within the company. I mean, not only are you not just trying to hire people because there's going to be a profit soon, it's understanding the numbers and tracking the numbers, having those metrics in place, and then understanding, I guess, a partnership also. Tell us a little bit about a company that you saw, and even from your own experience. What was it like from a employee, the owners? Was it a partnership? How did you deal with the relationships inside?
Well, my first company, there were 4 of us, so we had a C corp. So we went ahead and set that up, and then we also ended up having additional employees. So we were up to, I believe, 7 to 10 employees over time. They came in and out, and I think the challenge between those 2 relationships is, one, with the employees, it's a typical business. You have to make payroll. You have to decide, are you offering insurance at this time, or what's your 401k? So you have all of the management side of it, and you have to really be aware that those are things that you have to do. If you have employees, that's a different hat. It's not it's cool and it's fun and it's a startup, let's make this. It's
the
it's
HR
actual
hat.
It's the HR hat. It's just the tackle and actually weren't running our company.
Right.
The other side of it is, if you have partners, then there's relationships that you have with those partners. You have areas of responsibility. So you have to decide, is everyone carving out a certain section of the startup? And how do you trust between the two, make sure there's no conflict between that? Because sometimes they might cross over. And then like with a C Corp and some other ones, there are clearly, at least on paper, you have to have clearly defined hierarchy. Here's
Sure.
who's going to be the CEO, who's going to be the president, what's this title, whether it's a
Define
title
roles.
for just the business or the title for interacting with people. So you have to worry about that one, and I'll get back to that one because that one's an interesting one too. When you interact with other people in business or other customers or everything else, sometimes title does make a difference. They'll talk to the CEO before they'll talk to a VP.
Sure.
So depending on who's showing up at that meeting, you may have a different interaction with them, a different relationship, and that'll happen. But in terms of your question about the interacting with the people, the peers, one of the things I think it happens with everybody is you've got that early excitement. It's like everyone's like, oh, it's just the passion. We're going to change the world. So you're really excited about it. And then you've got to make sure that everybody has the same vision.
Right.
Because a lot of times, like when I started, I was in college. My peers were in college. All of us weren't in college. So, hey, let's go and we're going to do this. Well, over time, some of my partners went and worked for NASA, and then they moved on, and another partner moved to Tampa. So you start losing the partners, but they're still partners because they own part of the company.
Yeah.
So you have to figure out how to work with the
roles,
active and passive partnerships. Yes.
Right.
And so that makes it an interesting challenge.
Yeah, if I could add on to that,
Please.
I've gone through similar experiences. I started up my company in college, and this is something that you may not even know. I actually had 2 other business partners that I had met up in college who are no longer with us and had to go through similar experiences of managing expectations. Are we all working towards the same vision? Or it really came down to just making sure that everyone has a place and that they feel like they're working towards something. And that's something that we quickly found that, oh yeah, we all want to work towards this, but there's a difference between wanting to work and actually working towards something. So if we could also lead into something that's not really talked about too much, but burning out too early. I know that's that's something that it's not really talked about too much for startups and small business owners. We briefly talked about it with Stephen Newland, how he had to kind of take a little break from his business, but I think it's even heightened when you're actually trying to grow and scale a startup versus a small business. And I know Sean and I have had some conversations about that have really helped. That might also help the audience.
Yeah. For me, when I had my first company, so here I have Tachyon Communications Corporation. At different times throughout the course of that business, different opportunities arose. Sure. That I'd be working with a partner or somebody come with a concept, or we'd have a concept. And in some cases, those concepts had enough value to it that we felt we'd spin off with other partnerships. So it actually spawned multiple companies out of that with different partners. And so I was joking in the past with a lot of people, and I think we've talked about it in different ones, that the concept of don't burn the candle both ends. I was dousing gasoline. I'm just like, hey, it's fine. I can do all this because I was involved in each of them.
Right.
And so, and they weren't, in some cases, they were not completely aligned with the mission of the company, meaning that here we have this one where you have dial-up, you have web design, you have everything else. Oh, we happen to do some stuff with a radio station, and that's a different story I'll tell you from the marketing side of it. But because of how that worked out, we were like, well, we could create a radio station online. So we went and researched it. We found a partner out of Switzerland that joined with us. We brought in somebody that was from the radio industry, and we generated a whole company just to be online radio, because at that time, you really didn't have a lot of interaction overseas. It was a different model for how radio worked. It wasn't like we see now where you can go and there's iHeart and stuff. So this is the early days of this. So we put on a whole radio station, and so now it's internet related, but it's not really giving people access or web design. So now I'm kind of pulled into that one too, because I was doing stuff with that. And then we were helping companies, like one of our customers was Surfline. So because they go through and any place on these beaches around the world, they have indicators of what the surf conditions are.
Oh, yeah.
So we worked with them about putting cameras at the surf. That was going to be put them on the internet. So we were the early ones with doing that with Surfline. So we were working with Surfline, trying to figure out how to put video on the internet. it's internet related. It wasn't another company, but it was another project that was extensive. So as each of these chipped away, it's just a little bit more of my attention, a little bit more of my attention. We were still growing and managing everything, but it was just a little bit more of the energy.
Yeah. How do you deal with that? I mean, because I know that I experienced that, and I know you're involved with multiple things.
Yeah.
How do you determine when to cut a project out based upon the needs of another one from an attention standpoint?
Well, at that time, I was sure I could do it all.
Yeah.
Subway at 3 a.m. was okay. I'm just, I'm going to work, and I was flying to California for meetings for one company, and then flying for another company, and coming back, and in my mind, it was all related to the main company. That it's still internet, and building it up, and we were also at that time investigating creating something called the Tech and Internet Group. So we did have an office in Zurich. So we were expanding internationally in our company. I didn't know I could do it. I'm like, why not? This makes perfect sense to me. And we were looking at bringing in and trying to merge with some of our competitors. So kind of like how Mindspring and Earthlink did. Just didn't see their model early enough. But so we were working through all of those pieces. And I just thought I could do it all. And then over time, I mean, we're older now. Looking back, if I had gone through that again, I think it would have been more of there's presence, but you have to have an independent group working with that. So there's somebody in charge of that, kind of like the partners. There's somebody who's really leading that group, and then you're interacting with it, but you're not vested 100% in each one.
It lives or dies based upon your attention.
And you can't be 100% vested in each company. You got to be able to trust and do these different things. Yeah. But and that's how I ended up at AOL. Actually, I got to the point with combination of all of the competitors taking the market down, trying to do all this stuff. I just burned out. I literally just got to the point where I just found it harder and harder to concentrate on each thing. And over time, like I said, my partners weren't as vested. So it was me. I mean, it was starting to get more and more just on me.
Yeah.
And I just I need a break, and I'm done.
Sure.
And then I looked around, and I'll be honest, I went to AOL and thought, I'll be there a year. And then I'm getting back in the internet, startup. Woo.
Yeah.
And like I said, I was completely surprised about what opportunities they had within AOL and the stuff I got to play with and all of the great. I just was surprised to find myself still there 10 years later and didn't even notice the time had passed. And so that was kind of an interesting experience. Yeah. Never lost that entrepreneurship. I think where it worked well with AOL was AOL's structure was built in such a manner, it was at that time, that they encouraged the entrepreneurship internally. So they had all these new groups. They had VC groups that were spinning out stuff. Motley Fool came out of AOL from their greenhouse. Yeah, they had a greenhouse initiative, and they put out a bunch of things, and Motley Fool was one of them they spun out. And so you could sit there and come up with an idea and say, hey, let's try this out. And they go, okay. And for AOL,
the resources, you have some people, yeah. I mean,
and if you didn't have 1 million people on it, then they go, it didn't work. Because you could easily get 1 million people the next day, just because of cross promotion and different things. So you had really enough people to gain some traction or try things, and they were also acquiring things, a movie phone.
It really seems like
it
was just a godsend. Not only did you get to start, so your juices and your entrepreneurial mindset and all of the
resources,
everything, and then you found out that resources were key.
I didn't have to worry about not having enough resources like I do at the start. You go, okay, is it going to be this, or is it this or this? And and you're sitting there trying to figure it out. And then I'm like, wow, we've got all these resources. This is great.
You had a team.
Let me just start thinking.
Oh wow, okay.
I'm doing deep thoughts now. But
so things have changed a lot in the internet space.
It's a lot cheaper to start.
Is it? So yeah, I mean, Jacob,
if I can really quick, going back to kind of feeling overwhelmed of trying to do it all yourself. I mean, that's something that I've had, days or weeks or even months on end of having those same feelings. And Sean, through sharing some of those experiences with me, has been able to help me like identify focus and build out systems and processes that don't let me be more places at once, but they allow me to section off like what we're doing in real estate, treating that as a separate business, bringing in different people for that, as opposed to trying to spread people out between real estate, construction, events, podcasts, you know, whatever we're doing. And that's really been helpful, and for me, just trying to manage it all. And I mean, I don't think we're quite at the point that Sean was when he was going through some of those problems.
You don't have to burn the candle at both ends.
But yeah, again, that's I think something that just really goes really untalked about, just because it is kind of a lonely venture, especially when it does come all back to you at the end of the day, you know.
I recently had to go through a process of my own time management where I decided how many hours in a week that I was willing to commit to anything. So I started off with my main bucket, and let's say, you know, I forget what the numbers are now, but you know, whatever it was I was willing to put in 49 hours, or you know, whatever that, maybe it's 60 hours, and then you divide it up among your days, right? And then you say, okay, knowing that the worst thing we can do as entrepreneurs is to think we're going to multitask all day long and bounce back and forth from different concepts, right? So that means we have to actually have focus time for an item, and it can't be, I mean, it can be 30 minutes, but honestly, we really need more time to get into something. So if you start to think like that, you have to then just basically take your pie of hours and divide it up. Right. And when you realize that that's not enough time for this, or that's not enough time for this, you either add hours, which is the gasoline on the candlestick, or you decide that something isn't a priority. And then you can even list out the different ventures, projects, things that you have to do, and determine what is the value to my life, or what is the value to my mission or my thing. And then you just rank them.
Right.
And then you literally have to just decide whether or not there's enough time in the week and the month to allocate the kind of focus it requires for it to be successful. But there's a guy that I pay a lot of attention to, named Sam Ovens. He runs consulting.com. And he had this one image, and he says, you know, what's funny about focus is he put the circle, kind of like the mind map, and he says, if you're focused on a bunch of different things, imagine these different arrows coming out of the circle. He's like, but if you can just find one thing to focus on, that one thing that you want to be successful at, and you put all of that energy into one line, that's what it means to really push forward and have traction. So a lot of times we get distracted by all these other ideas, you know, and in the end of the day, it just, none of them really took off because of so many variables, right?
Right.
But had you been maybe focused on one thing, and that was a different time, so it's not fair in technology to say.
No, I agree with you completely. I think from that time we weren't quite sure what things
was
were going
to
take off. So you're trying a couple things. But I agree completely. One thing I've talked about to Jacob and to other people as well is I think that when you start up something, you feel this responsibility because you have the passion, but you feel like you're always missing an opportunity if you're not doing everything.
Right.
It's because you're trying to build stuff. So you're like, oh, everything's an opportunity, and it's either I lost it or I got it. And it really comes down through a lot of things. It can be joining organizations. Like a lot of the group meetings, there's great organizations here. There's TAG, there's MITEF, there's TIE, there's the Alpharetta Tech Alpharetta. There's a lot of them here that support ATDC, and every one of them have very valuable meetings. They have valuable content and valuable support. And as an entrepreneur, you're like, oh, I got to join all these because, I'm getting this from that and that.
Right.
And you do get variety, and it's great. But
there's only
you don't
so
have
much time.
Right, and you find yourself either
It's
you're
finite.
always going to meetings.
It's a resource.
It's a resource.
Think of it as a resource.
Exactly. So some of the advice I give now is join the organizations, get a feel for what they have.
Right.
And then you can pick and choose. You can say, oh, this month they're talking about cybersecurity, or they're talking about this. That I like to attend that one, but I won't attend it next month because you don't have to. It's not like you're not responsible for attending their meetings. So if you pick and choose, because otherwise you're always going to meetings.
Yeah.
And then you got the opposite side where everybody starts talking about where VCs, for example, if you're always pursuing funding but you're not spending any time on the business, you'll never start the business.
Sure.
And 100% of the time you're out looking for funding. So you have to find a balance.
You got to find the balance.
And there's another that we see quite a bit especially in the tech space, is some entrepreneurs, especially with a heavy tech background, just get so into product development and they want to refine it to a point of perfection that's never going to be achieved. And then they have zero customers. And at the end of the day, if you're not providing service or value to customers, you can have the best product in the world, and you don't exist at the end of the day.
It just goes away, and you have to go get a real job.
Right.
Right. I mean,
but going back to the distractions really quick,
Awesome.
that another way that I've found helpful is really focusing on what's providing value right now, that we have processes behind that, and we've now separated our business almost into a commercial side and then an R&D side, because like Sean, I'm just very all over the place. I like seeing how we can use drones in a new industry, or videos in a new industry, a new market, new customer. But at the end of the day, we can only do so much of that with a limited team and limited resources.
Right.
So just really in the last month or two is when we've really been able to kind of separate those out. What are cool projects that they still might bring in money, but they're not really scalable right now with what we have to work with, versus we have the capability to really scale out these 2 or 3 services. Yeah. And I look at focus a different way than most people. I think, especially again in the tech sphere, you always hear focus, 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 and they're like, just do one thing, grow that vertical pillar up, and then move on to the next thing. Not saying that's not the best way, but if you're just doing that one pillar and then closed-minded to other pillars that could take off, I mean, to give a real-world example, like we're doing real estate pretty heavily right now, doing photography, video tours, virtual tours, drone imagery. And then we also have another one that's closely related, where it's a very similar process in doing home inventories. But then if we wanted to take that and then go into construction and offer some of those services, it's very different, even though we're using the same technology and even some of the same personnel.
Sure.
You have to know the language that industry speaks in, and then they might have slightly different deliverables that they want out of it. So that's a way that I've really found helpful. It's just sectioning off what's a commercial side that you have processes built out for, that you can scale right now if you were to have a customer that needed that volume, versus, all right, how can this technology be used in other industries?
Sounds like you've created 2 main pillars, 2 main columns of your business. And what I heard you say, if it's not fully developed yet, maybe it is or isn't, but you're going to focus on the one that is really scalable right now, and create enough customers and relationship to where then you can even hire someone to become your person, which is what I heard you say, is that you really need to be, if you're going to be multi-directional in your business model concept, you really need to position one with a key person who is running it day to day, so that you can talk to that team member and not have to be 100% engaged, and but still benefit from the entrepreneurial mind. Like a lot of times, business owners, we start off as visionaries, right? And that visionary mindset is why we develop 4 to 5 to 20 companies. But the problem is that the implementing and actually executing a strategy day in and day out needs to be carried out with someone who is hyper focused on that one area.
Right.
So what I heard you say, which is brilliant, is that you're developing one line very specifically to drive new business.
Right.
You will then develop that into its own self-sustaining business model,
Right.
which allows you to, while you were sort of researching, developing this second pillar, but not hyper-focused on it, you're then going to be able to shift your focus once you have a key person guiding those operations.
Right.
Is that kind of where...
Exactly.
I didn't hear it fully developed, but I heard the seedling, that was where you were heading.
Right, yeah.
And I think also the other point that was really good was keeping an eye on the horizon.
Sure.
So because that's the big thing now. Everybody, the big companies, you're worried. They're like, oh, I didn't see that the Airbnbs were going to come or the Uber. They weren't keeping an eye on where the technology's going.
Where's it going?
Yeah, it's like the buggy whips. I mean, that was a great market until the horses disappeared. No, like I've got the best one, and we've got a whole 10-year plan.
I always go back to Blockbuster. That's such a strange story.
Netflix took them out.
Didn't see it coming.
Right, until it's too late.
And that's the same kind of issue I'm seeing that a lot of people are overlooking with drones. And it seems so obvious to me. We went through the same process with computers, right?
Yeah.
They didn't really have an application until the internet and a lot more software and content came out for that. And we're in the same right. We're in the same position with drones, even though there's more capable technology available to allow drones to do more from the get-go. Still going back to the infrastructure, it's just not there for the autonomous systems that we'll need to have your cup of coffee delivered to you in a 27-story building, but those are very real applications 20-30 years down the road that I don't think most people are thinking about, that drones are going to be able to do, and they're going to be a part of our everyday lives just as computers are now. And, that was even a fault of mine when I first got started in the business. I was like, oh, drones, they take photos and videos. That's about it. But then once you start to realize right now they can already do much more, like we were talking about, like the photogrammetry, 3D modeling, mapping, some of the agricultural stuff where you can do crop analysis.
Delivering
medicine.
Rural areas, yeah.
And this, we're still in the Wild West of aviation, is what I like to say.
I was watching a couple videos this morning on just the military drones and then just the development of the F-35. Yeah. How long it's taken to get that from concept to reality. I mean, it's like we're talking about 20 plus, maybe even up to 30 years has it been?
Yeah,
the F-35 concept. And of course, it's this awesome plane that's replacing all these things. But what we have now is such a... I mean, we're going to have unmanned, our Air Force will probably be unmanned very soon.
Very soon.
To the point of, the F-35 was a complete waste of... I mean, it's amazing.
Right.
But it's like...
Still automated.
I'm not really sure now that the market has shifted.
Right.
The technology has appeared in a way that will transform everything that happens. And it's currently doing that to where... I know the F-35 has its own applications and all those reasons, but it was just amazing to watch how long it's taken to get that kind of technology out when all of a sudden drones showed up and the short period of time it took for them to become what they are militarily.
Right.
Not to mention, from a civilian standpoint, I mean, so fast. It went from flying a little helicopter in the store playing around to this is serious.
Right. Yeah. Now there's regulations.
Holding up airports.
Yeah. Right.
Holding airports hostage.
I think that you were asking before about the difficulty or the barrier to entry for internet and other things, including drones. It's gone down. I mean, I could start a AI company. You go find code. You get this. You get a website. You put server. So the actual ability to create something is a lot easier than it was. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the ability to stand out from the crowd is probably a little harder because now it's not scarcity. Now it's everyone's got the same website.
So let's talk about that, because you mentioned that as being one of the other key components of a technology business is the differentiation. How do you see companies, and maybe there's some examples that you've just seen coming into its own place, of what would you recommend to a business owner who is trying to break out into the technology of today? And how would you share with them your insights into differentiation or just really doing it in a way that's going to be successful?
That's an interesting question.
I know that was probably 20 questions in one.
That's a good point. And especially since it's changed over time. Like I said, the ability to quickly peek over whoever's your competitor has gone down because everybody's just inundated with all of these messages all the time now.
Right.
Through social media, through the TV, through all the other different platforms that they're consuming, the phones, everything else. So you're constantly building up this blind spot.
Right.
And where before, I think radio was supposed to be, was it 7 or 10 times on a radio spot is when it traditionally is when they expect that you've heard it. and process. But that may have changed now. I mean, that I don't know when the last time they've checked that data. That could be, sure, that was true in the 80s and 90s, and I don't, in early 2000s. I don't know if now you even notice it. But
I think it's similar, just different distribution methods. Like
Yeah.
you still hear all the time, like you need to see something, read something, hear something 7 times before you go make the purchase or make a decision to look further.
So I think the differentiation point is where you really feel that you're bringing value,
Right.
and where you want your message, your voice is really going to stand out in the crowd. I know everyone uses the word voice and filters and all these different ways of looking at things, but lenses is a big one. But like Amazon's consumer, I mean, they're customer focused. Your best customer service you can get is their goal. I mean, whatever, customer's always right, no matter what. And each one's picking their battles. From a startup, I think being creative, and that's it, and people are trying to do that. You see the YouTube and everything. It's the ones that really go viral, the ones that are unexpected. You're like, wait a minute, what was that? And so if you can find a way to do that without, in a positive way, you don't want negative exposure.
Positive disruption to the
to get attention.
baseline wavelength.
Yeah.
We all kind of have a baseline of blind spot to advertising to messaging, and unless you break that and you hit almost like a spike in the creative, I mean, like, what was that? You're right. So
right, and I think
oh man, I hate the fact that we're going to develop a blind spot to that at some point.
You never know. I mean, there was a famous video where you're sitting there watching it and they tell you to count how many times I think it's a basketball's thrown between people, and you completely miss the bear walking through. It's got a guy in a bear suit. Right. You never see it. You're just like, and then you go back to the video and they're standing there waving at you. It's just your mind just totally wiped it out because you're following the ball. But it's just how our brains work as well. But like in the past, I mentioned the radio station. I wanted to bring that up. We just did an experiment. We had R&D in the middle of the night. I think it was 2 a.m. when we tried this. And in early days, we just took sound out of the radio and then put it in the computer sound card. And we were sampling it. That's all we did. You know, people were doing different things. We sampled it and we linked it. So if you hit a button on the website, it would sample it and then it would send it to you as an audio file. You could listen to it. Samples are maybe 10 seconds. We started seeing all these hits from all over the world. Because at that time, radio or music was being distributed based on agreements and everything else. So a lot of times a song that would come out in the U.S. might come out 4 months later somewhere else.
Sure.
So they're hitting here. They're listening to U.S. American radio music. So that's how we were like, huh. So we went and talked to a radio station and said, well, we would love to put you guys online. It was WA1A in Melbourne. And so they were like, oh, what's this internet? We brought them in the office. We showed them the clips because we were sampling. And we had mocked up a website. And they were like, oh, this is the greatest thing ever. And so we were like, oh, this is great. Yeah. And I don't know about now, but traditionally, different companies, you have opportunities to negotiate.
Sure.
And they like to barter. Different ones. It's like, oh, you do this and we get this. So we were able to work out some arrangements where we got, as part of our agreements between them, that we also got some airtime. So we were putting their website up. So all of a sudden our ads are hitting all over the place going, Tachyon Communications, come listen to the internet on their radio station. And we were showing up at their different things where they had live events and they were giving away internet. So all of a sudden we found a way to have a marketing campaign without coming in traditionally like, oh, here's all this money.
Sure.
Because we were able to work out and help each other with money and goods. But so that helped us because that was one of the ways that we stood out is all of a sudden we've now connected through a different medium that everyone's hearing. And then that experience led to the radio station that went online. So it's like each one was small steps at just doing an experiment. We didn't know how far that would have gone. We just thought, oh, this is cool, and we'll put it up there and see what happens. So I do think that trying some different things, you might be surprised what stands out.
Yeah, sure.
Be aware of what stands out because sometimes you may miss it if you aren't paying attention. Like if we hadn't been looking at our logs and made that connection about people from all these countries were clicking on it, we may never have really had that insight that would have led to other things. And so I think that goes back to
it goes back to knowing your metrics, right?
Knowing your metrics.
Knowing your numbers and KPIs and figuring out
and be aware of
which ones are more relevant
Yeah.
to a bigger picture.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you start to look at the data and you say, what is this?
Right.
And whether that's in modern times or back when you were just getting started, it's the same principle
Right.
of being able to keep your eye on the horizon, pay attention to the data, and don't look at the data through a filter of,
Right.
Emotion, really.
emotion,
Yeah.
or that what we have is the only thing.
Preconceived conceptions.
Yeah.
Right.
And the reason I brought some of this up was we were talking about how to stand out.
Yeah.
Well, strangely enough, if you think about most of our marketing attention now is all online. So it may be that something more physical might stand out more depending on your demo.
Right.
Oh, right, sure.
And so it's one of these where you have to figure out really who you think your customers are and then do some sampling, but try some things and see what really resonates, because some people might be pushing back and they are ignoring it on the SoundCloud, but they just happen to see it on the street and somebody's holding a sign in a bear outfit, which I do see the spinners. I mean, it stands out. You're trying not to hit them, but you're like, you're kind of curious. Oh, I wonder what he's doing. But it may be that there's different pathways that your competitors are all ignoring. Ignoring because they're going. Sorry about apologizing to the microphone, it's to the audience making noises. But I think that the competitors a lot of times, if they follow the crowd, because your intent is to stand out from the crowd.
Right. So you've got to identify that maybe you're online for obvious reasons, but at the same time, just because everyone is doing Facebook ads doesn't necessarily mean that's where you want to focus. Maybe you should disrupt that and go the opposite way.
Right. Or try some samples. They call them A/B testing and different things. See which one, but don't be scared to try some other avenues just because other people haven't.
Right. Or even if they have, you might be able to find out how to do it effectively in a different way. Right. That's kind of what we're going through right now, especially like with our home inventory service. We're finding that the homeowners buying the service are typically older, that they've been able to buy collections. And while, there's more and more people online on Facebook that we could advertise to, the best way that we found is talking to the insurance agents directly and then allowing them to basically be our sales force, because they're the ones talking with those homeowners on a recurring basis. They have established rapport. And as much as our service benefits the homeowner, it benefits the insurance company as well. So to Sean's credit, it's just really figure out who your customer is and reverse engineer a path to get there. And, it's going to take a lot of failed attempts, but I mean, this is something that I've heard, fail fast and fail often, and then just try out something new. And, as long as it's not too costly, at least what doesn't work.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, what was that movie that came out, The Intern? Was that the
one?
Yeah. And he was like, oh, here's a yellow page. It's like, what? But it sometimes it's just, and we've seen it in all the industries, you're just moving forward. And I think to the point about the infrastructure, there's a lot of new companies out, and they're like, oh, it's the greatest thing ever on the internet. And you can sit there and name names of here's who had it in 2000, here's this, and they didn't make it because
the infrastructure
wasn't ready.
Right.
The logistics wasn't there. The perception wasn't there.
Yeah, I felt like that was a key insight, was just that recognizing that, whatever's happening the world may not be ready for it yet. And it's like, it's not a bad thing to be a pioneer, but can be a very poor road to travel, and a very frustrating one when no one gets it yet. So you really want to spend some time on things that are going to generate the results you're after, right? I mean, if it's to earn money, well, then you want to figure out, I mean, maybe Instagram isn't the right way, even though it's like, everyone's moving that way. It'll be the next big thing. Well, if Facebook ads are working today, why are you going to, maybe put all your energy into Instagram just because everyone's moving that way? Like, if they're not there yet, if it's not established yet, if it's not going to yield the same results, you know what I'm saying? Then why put the energy into it?
Don't be a pioneer just to be a pioneer, right?
Or, unless that was your mission, unless you were funded somehow because of that. Like, it's not a big deal to go and do research on blue whales, you know what I'm saying? But if you never find a blue whale, I was watching Shipwreck. It was a shipwreck thing, and they were funded to go out and find all these ancient wrecks in, like, the Black Sea or where it was. And they weren't sure if they were going to find anything, and it was very frustrating. But they were funded, and their purpose was to go and see what they would find.
And you
learned. It wasn't that they were going to come back with treasurer because that was the only way they were going to then, have money.
Right.
It was very different. They were all being paid.
Right.
Right, and it was the audience got to experience what it's like and throw
Yes.
ads
I
again.
mean, it was a
whole
for a
other
show, and
revenue
there were
stream
ads,
underneath it.
and
Oh, yeah.
that was the model. So you got to
Right.
decide, is your
Yeah.
business model, an XYZ, and then what are the results that business model should yield when it is successful?
Right.
Identifying that, making sure that you allocate the time resources appropriately and not spreading yourself out too thin, I think are key things.
The other one I'd like to bring up, you touched on it for a second there about, we were talking in the past about people being stressed. And, you're going through, and we talked about the burning and the burnout and everything else, is there's not a lot of groups that talk about it publicly, but from like a startup or a small business, it's lonely. I mean, people are usually, it's an island themselves. They're the ones that believe in the vision, or
Right.
they got a tight group. And we talked about in the past that you can't really share it with other people because sometimes your internal experience where you're happy or sad about something is magnified or is misinterpreted on the inside because they don't have the relevant information or the viewpoint, so they're
How to
seing
put
it
it
from
in
a different way in the
Right.
context.
You mentioned
So,
the relationship we talked about briefly was about a spouse relationship,
right.
or your partner. Going home and sharing something that feels like a big win, what I'm saying, can be amplified.
Right.
Or if it was a loss, but it
Right.
wasn't in our minds devastating, but it
Right.
can then be. What did you say?
An example could be you have a sales call and they sounded positive they're going to buy, so you came back inside, they're buying, now your spouse thinks you're buying a new house.
Yeah.
Or the sales call didn't go out that great, they're like, maybe I'll think about it, so you go back, it's like, and now they think you're selling the house. So it's,
right.
so one of the things that I would definitely suggest to the audience is find a group of people to sit there and talk to. And a lot of times it could be peers that are in your industry that are also have small businesses, or it could be the trade groups that we're talking about, like the ATDCs and the TIE and different ones. But find a group of people that it's just everyone's in the same boat, and that you can just, hey, how's your day? Oh, I had a bad day. And it's like, oh, hey, don't worry about it. So you've got kind of a group that you can just kind of share with, or
Right.
you can depend on a little bit. Because nobody's really alone in the business. It's just it feels like it because everybody's so concentrating on one particular thing. So they got that tunnel vision,
Right.
and they don't realize that everyone else might have that same thing, and they're having the same challenges.
Yes.
And I think that's really important. The other thing is that we were talking about the burnout from always doing stuff. So go ahead and just do something fun. I mean, you feel like you're cheating yourself or cheating the business, but just do something that takes your mind off the business, whether it's active or mental, it's a movie or something that's just outside of it, just to give you a little bit of moment for just to sit there and process and to kind of get back on focus.
Right.
And you find that it helps you in some ways too. When I had the web design company, the Tachyon, I would take my team, because we'd be trying to figure out how to make web pages for somebody. I'm like, oh, this company, well, what would we do? I would take them on field trips. We'd go out and do something outside, or I took them to the bookstore one time. We all looked at magazines, and it wasn't to copy the magazines, but it's just something you're like, oh, I got an idea. It's just because it took your mind off the track, and your unconscious is kind of like percolating and thinking about it. So I think a lot of times that's something that people aren't aware of. It's just get out of the environment and just give yourself enough time to maybe come up with a different way of solving the problem or something else.
I have noticed that when I take time to just stop and just think about stuff. I mean, like you get caught up in, I gotta get this done, boom, 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 activity, and whatever it is. And if you don't stop and maybe take a 3-day weekend or go just somewhere and just sit and think and just watch, all of a sudden I feel like ideas that were kind of being almost kept out of the front of my brain somehow begin to slide in. I'm like, that's it, and
Right.
It wasn't like I was doing something spectacular. It was just literally I stopped this mentality. I just allowed everything I've been doing to kind of take a higher level to it. The vision showed up, the visionary type.
Yeah, that's, kind of similar to how I got this thing started, just taking the time to sit and think, like, what do I want to do with my life? And, like, how can I make that happen, And that's a lot of time, like, thinking is work that a lot of people, like, don't put the time and effort into really doing. Like, am I on the trajectory that I want to be on? If
Yeah.
not, what do I have to do to change that?
Right.
And again, it just goes overlooked, especially if you get started with something and then you just want to keep going down that path without really reflecting, is this what the correct thing to be doing? And again, kind of just relating it back to a personal experience, the first year and a half or so of us conducting business, it was pretty much just all R&D that we were doing. It was just throwing spaghetti on the wall, seeing what sticks, and, you know, not really having any short-term vision or short-term goals to achieve our long-term vision, which I'm always going to say start with the long-term. Sean and I have always kind of talked about this where, you know, everyone can live their life their own way, but I look at it kind of business life, whatever. Where do you want to be? Set a flight plan, so to speak, and it's all right to deviate from that path. Just make sure you have enough fuel. Don't burn out, you know.
Yeah.
Or have enough money.
Sorry. Yeah, or have enough money.
There's
Yeah.
revenue, emotional.
But yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot to wanting to like start and grow a business that just it seems like rainbows and butterflies to a lot of people from the outside.
Yeah.
But heck, even on the inside, you're talking about, you know, feeling alone or not having everyone unified on the vision. Like that's something that Gerardo, Brian, and I, the three partners, like we're all working towards the same thing, and we're all actively working, have our own different parts. But at the end of the day, they're not as vested as me, and they never will be, and I don't expect them to. And I think that's another big problem that people come into starting business. They expect everyone involved to be just as vested as they are.
Oh,
and
sure.
Like I've had conversations with Gerardo. He was like, I like what we're doing. I love what we're doing. I love that we're working together, but it's not a calling for me like it is to you. Like you feel like this is your life. Like
Right.
you have a point to prove, so to speak, where he sees that it's a viable future for himself, even though it's not the only future for himself. That
But
makes
I
sense.
think you're right. I mean, it's really important to check in. You start with the exit in mind,
Right.
you know, when you run a business, or you should. And oftentimes, Gerardo may have a different exit,
Right.
you know,
Different
than you.
timetable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a different timetable.
That's huge.
And,
Yeah.
and having those conversations, and then again, not letting yourself become resentful of other partners or just any business, or not becoming resentful, and actually appreciating what the person's doing. And even at that point, those conversations can yield, it can change what the role looks like.
Right.
You know, I mean, maybe they're not meant to be in that role because it's not their thing, and they can still take a role as a partner, but maybe it shouldn't be whatever that one primary role was.
Or it changes. I mean, that's the famous thing
Yeah.
you mentioned before about the founders. A lot of them are very visionary, and then once the company gets to a certain level, they're like, I'm not the right person for this role any longer.
Right.
And there are. I mean, some who go, okay, I'm just going to go and either be a visionary within the company or start another company, and they bring in someone behind them that is more, you know, we're just going to do this every day and go that. And it's not as, so it just depends on the mindset. And,
Sure.
and people do move around because maybe over time they find out someone was better at a certain aspect as the company has evolved to actually allow them to do that
Right.
role. Maybe it wasn't there in the beginning, but it appeared.
Yeah,
So
All right.
that's very wise.
Yeah, so if you want to go ahead, and I know we have a recurring question that we like to ask our guests.
Yeah,
no.
you know, well, and we hit on like
42.
some great some great points. But if there was maybe one thing that really that stood out, I mean, whether it's especially within the role of the technology world, and there's a lot of people out there who, at this point, are starting an app and using the apps to do all kinds of awesome things. What's the one thing you would share from your journey of and seeing pitfalls and being a part of successes that you think they might benefit if they walked away with today?
From a technology point of view or business point of view?
Well, I think
you
from the business of technology.
Okay. I think that with the pace of everything that's happening, always be open to learning. Because, like we mentioned, I have a computer science background. Coding's changing. There's a new language every 2 years. It's just because situations change or they come up with something that works a little better for different things. As one example,
Yeah.
Platforms change, devices change, drones, everything else. I know they talk about being a life learner. I think that, especially if you're in a small business or an entrepreneur side, that is really important. You don't have to be an expert at something. It's just being aware that things are changing.
Yeah.
And I know Bill Gates and all of them really promote reading books, having a book each year, just so that you're continually expanding or keeping your mind fresh.
Right.
I think that's the biggest thing, because I think and for me, for the technology and for the business people, it's just because your customers and your marketplace, everything else, are going to be moving with whatever these trends are or these new technologies. They'll slowly be going. So you want to just make sure that you're part of it and you're aware, so that you can anticipate and make some relevant decisions about where you want to take it, or if you want to say, hey, I'm happy in this space and it's got probably a 20-year, let's say something has a 10 or 20-year span before it moves on. Maybe that's, but you can make conscious decisions.
It almost seems like there needs to be a new title in the org chart. Chief
Learning officer.
Chief learning officer.
Well, they have
and come back and report.
But
the chief book reader, chief.
Tell me what's ahead. Yeah.
Putting their finger on the pulse, because I know that. I mean, there's so much to read. There's so much to learn. There's so many things to go to hear people speak, and that's transforming the way we do things.
Right.
Well, the big thing is not to be afraid as well, because there's so many different resources out there now that will teach you what you need to know.
Sure.
That you can sit and watch video lessons on this, or learn about this, or find somebody that either can help you with it or do it for you. They have Fiverr. They have so many different resources now that you can go, maybe I don't need to know how to do that. I just need to understand what I need and what I want to achieve with it, and find a way to have that done for you.
It's an interesting freelance role, chief learning officer.
Chief learning officer.
I'm thinking your fractional chief learning officer.
I'm thinking I would love that one. I would like that.
This is new.
Jake will tell you, I'm always sending them, have you seen this? Or this?
Yeah.
So I'm really big on
freelance the hell out of that, man. That's good.
And if I can maybe add on to that, surround yourself with people that are going to help progress you forward, and that will that may be proficient or experts in areas that you may not be as comfortable with, and get to know them, get to know the experiences that they've had. That maybe it's a different technology or a different business, but if you're constantly thinking about how you can apply it to your business, really the sky's the limit as far as how much you can learn. And one thing that Sean has really talked about is be a learn-it-all, don't be a know-it-all. And it takes a certain type of mindset to really stop and think that anything that you know could be wrong. It can change, adapt over time, or just our current understanding could be flat out wrong. So
I think the other thing that's to watch out for too is, just because you or your industry hasn't solved something doesn't mean another industry they might have an answer. Right. Some examples is the Howard Hughes Institute. They had just put it in Ashburn when I left Virginia. They just built it. And one of the things that they were talking about was they had a problem apparently in one of the fields because their concept is they'll bring in scientists from different fields and have them work together. So they'll be there, but they're also sharing. They have lunch together and different things so that they can cross-pollinate ideas. And there was something I'd read that I can't remember. I think it was in the chemistry side that they had some big problem. It's been forever in chemistry. And the gentleman was sitting there eating with another scientist from another field, and the guy's like, "What are you talking about? We solved that." No idea, because the journals, they're very siloed. And so it just opened up all stuff in chemistry because they solved it on the biology side or something. They had just found a way that the chemistry, the chemical industry hadn't really thought about. It was just an out-of-the-box avenue of solving the problem. So I think that really lends itself well to entrepreneurs as well. For Jacob's point is, if you have people from different industries, or you have the opportunity to work in different industries, I've I've had that opportunity, so I have a lot of experience across lots of different crazy stuff, from the NBA for sports to hotel hospitality to internet side to medical to all these different ones. But each one gave me a little bit of a different viewpoint on things. Sure. So I was able to cross-pollinate and say, oh, I saw this, and that would work well with that. So if you have the opportunity to do that yourself through your experience, or you're able to have people from different experiences work with you or interact with you through a mentorship or these groups, so that you can bounce ideas off and get a different viewpoint, you may find ways to solve things you never even thought of. I think it's a value.
Chief Learning Officer. We need that.
I'm ready to start. I like that.
When I can afford you.
Chief Learning Officer.
Well, so speaking of which, tell us a little bit about what your current business is now, and it sounds like you have a lot to offer from a consulting role. How can people reach out to you, and who is the right person to reach out to you to gain from your experience within what they're trying to do in their business?
Right now, like I said, I've been consulting for some different groups, and they're all in different sectors. So at the same time, so but I guess the common factor is that a lot of it's pulling from my past internet experience or current internet experience, how to bring their industry into that arena. But some of them are software and product. It's just because I wear many hats. But in terms of reaching out to me,
does it even make sense for them to reach out to you? Are you kind of booked right now, or?
I'm always open for consulting opportunities, and right now,
like maybe a product that they're trying to get out there from a technology standpoint would be maybe a good fit.
Product development, marketing, trying to figure out how to set their adjust for it.
Okay.
Because I have the engineering background in computer science, I help architect or design things. Like I said, that's the problem with wearing many hats. That's why I like the Chief Learning Officer. But they can reach out to me through LinkedIn. I'm Sean Franklin on LinkedIn. That's my shortcut is Sean Franklin. I was lucky enough to get that.
Well, great. So people can reach out to you through LinkedIn. And we just want to say thank you so much
thank you
for joining us today. Just a ton of history within the technology space. And there's just so much more to come, I can imagine. Jacob, thank you for being on the show. How can people reach out to Drones iVue, Media iVue, from a standpoint of, you focus on specifically right now, one of your main pillars was the insurance groups and dealing with inventorying of the homes so that when there is a loss, it's just a streamlined process to getting put back whole.
Right. So, definitely anyone right now, our three main pillars are within construction, real estate, and insurance. So anyone in those industries or other industries, again, I am open to some R&D opportunities. You can find us at ivue.media. That's www.ivue.media. Or you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or you can email me directly at info@ivue.media.
And your crew is the one that's helping us produce this time in and podcast in and out.
Yes.
So I want to thank you very much for helping us make this a reality.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for joining us for another episode of Profit Minded Business Podcast. And we hope that you were able to pull something from it. And if you do want to reach out to us, you can find us, or you can just email me at Corbin at profitmindedbiz.com. If you have questions, or if you think maybe you'd like to be a part of what we're doing here, we'd love to hear from you. So thanks again, everyone.